When I read this research, the big thing that just kept jumping out at me, to be honest with you, was there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between consumers and companies and contact centres at the moment. They're moving so much faster than we are. And as an industry, we need to get our stuff together. We need to do it quite quickly because the rate of change that consumers are demanding, all they're saying is whenever you research it, is they're just saying businesses are disconnected. They don't understand that we're changing and they're not changing quick enough. And that's really all this research, and we've got some other research we've done recently, exactly the same things coming out. Consumers are changing. They believe we're sort of disconnected from the organisations and operations, and the speed at which we're changing as an industry is not fast enough, basically. So what we're going to do now is we're going to step into the world of the consumer today. So what I want to do is I've put together a few slides here basically to try and sum up how we see consumers changing the way in which they're communicating or want to communicate with operations. And I want you to really think hard about this, because as we go on and go through the other challenges today, it's about applying this to your organisation. Where are you in this journey? Think about the demographics of your customers, how they're trying to communicate with you, and how ready your operation is to deal with this. So I've got an app for that. Again, if you're on Twitter, follow this. It's been tweeted as we speak. So I wanted to start off by actually going back and looking at a couple of slides that we presented in November 2006. So this was an event called Your World Upside Down. And these were some predictions that we made about what was happening to consumers over the next few years, basically. So, a fairly decent period of time ago. And we highlighted a number of things that were happening. The first thing was this concept of communication generations developing. So what's happening is with technology, different groups of consumers are growing up with technology, and those technologies are changing the way in which they communicate with companies. Our problem is we're designing service to fit one, when actually there's 4 or 5 different profiles of people out there. We predicted that new mobile devices were going to drive a lot of change. I think there's plenty of evidence to prove that. We talked about video. We talked about web moving from being, Google and search to something used to collaborate with. And we also talked about people combining the use of channels on a single interaction. So this concept of communication generations, this is the sort of idea we came up with. And really what we were trying to illustrate was the fact that you had sort of different groups of people who were working in slightly different ways. So if we cast ourselves forward to now, in 2012, what's actually happened? 6 years later, what's actually happened with the way consumers work? And without a doubt, technologies and the development of technology and the rate of development of technology is starting to define generations very, very clearly. So when we did that presentation in 2006, we had a Forrester guy with us who basically had some predictions on the speed at which people would take up smartphones. And I went back and had a look at those predictions, and basically we've pretty much done Moore's laws on smartphones. So basically what he said was going to happen in terms of the rate at which we were going to take smartphones in the UK, we've outstripped it 5-1. So the rate at which smartphones have turned up and come into our world has been much, much faster than the analysts predicted. And that sort of illustrates the problem. So really there are 2 technologies which have amplified the prediction of these sort of communication generations developing. First one is social media. So social media, 2006, if you looked at the usage of social media, and I've got a chart later on that will show you that, it was fast-moving, rising, youth-based tool that people were using very much as what we call a search profile tool, which is going out, finding friends, setting up communities, getting in contact with people, that sort of stuff. It's been commercialized massively. So from our point of view, what's happened is Facebook have woke up to the fact that they've got to make themselves into the biggest organization in the world. How are they going to do that? So they've thought very, very cleverly about the way in which we want to communicate going forward and have made their platform provide that solution. So without a doubt, that has become one of the biggest driving factors. The biggest driving factor from that is it's also become what we call the primary messaging platform for a lot of people. So a lot of people now use Facebook and social as the way to communicate with their friends and their colleagues. When you add that to smartphones, you've got a heady mix. Because the thing that's happened with smartphones is all of us have moved away from sitting at desks and accessing the web, Google search in the evening, at work, etc., to accessing the web all the time. So we're always on the web, unless you've got a BlackBerry, like me, which means you can't get on the web, basically. So. But as long as you've got an iPhone or an Android or something like that, then, and that's why BlackBerry won't exist in 12 months' time. But at the end of the day, most of us are able to get on the web while we're on the move. Now, the weird thing is, what's happened with that, there's two things have happened with that. People have realized, right, we've got this device that's web connected in the pocket all the time of our consumers. So they've started to build apps, which means I've got a richer experience. And the second thing is, that's basically meant that we can access social media on the move. If you can access social media on the move, you're going to be doing it all the time, which is what's now happening. So these two things have collided and have basically taken us to light speed in terms of change. And the stats behind it are frightening. So let's look at what's universal before we start to look at what's different. Well, internet usage is universal. All generations, whether you're 75 or 15, you use the internet. The secret is to understand how you use the internet differently based on your age. So there's huge variety in the way in which people of different ages use the internet starting to develop. And this is reinforcing this whole generation piece. So the elderly, and I am making a generalization here, but it is a generalization backed up by a lot of research, predominantly use it as a research tool. So, and I can, from our point of view, obviously there are more connected elderly people than I'm making out here. But if you look at the average, predominantly that generation see the internet and the value of the internet as a way of becoming an expert on everything. And believe you me, when I sit down with my dad these days, it's hard work because he is an expert on everything. A lot of time on his hands and access to the internet. Deadly. So they love, what they are starting to wake up to is the fact that their grandchildren and things like that are using the internet as a communication tool. So things like Skype, we'll come on and talk about Skype in a minute, highly used in these areas. But predominantly it's a research-based tool. When interviewing people over the age of 65 and asking them about internet usage, the thing that comes out top for usage is researching holidays and travel by 35, 40%, without a doubt. Adults, people like ourselves, what do we use it for? Well, we're a transacting generation. We see the internet, definitely still a research tool, definitely still communication, but what we have seen is, we've seen it as an opportunity to buy and sell things. It is a great medium, and we're quite happy to go on and use the convenience of it to buy things. So we see it as a very transactional thing. So we buy and sell. If you look at eBay usage is really concentrated in the UK to a segment of the population, which is sort of 25 to mid-40s. More than 50% of eBay usage sits in that sort of chunk, basically, of the population. The younger profile, what do they use it for? Well, my two nieces, who are teenagers, they use it for collaboration. So they don't see it as yes, they do research. Obviously, everybody uses the internet as a research tool. But what they see it as is a medium in which to communicate with their friends. It's a collaboration tool. So these generations are seeing the internet and the use of the internet in very, very different ways. And that poses us, as people running customer service organizations, big challenges. Has anybody ever heard of Remix? Hopefully not, otherwise you're going to blow a hole in my whole argument. Great, none of you have heard of it. So you will do. So I've got nieces now, a 13-year-old girl, who basically goes online and she uses this tool called Remix to take pictures, music, stick it all together, and then just throw it at her friends. It's a creative environment, basically, yeah? So Remix is where you can basically, it's almost like a publishing and editing environment, where you can take what you like, you can put your content, take other people's content, put it together, and then share it with a group. So that's a universal thing. Skype is a universal thing. So Skype is a great example of a use of the internet in order to communicate with people, both video and audio. And the interesting thing is, if you look across all the generations, Skype is universal. Everybody, roughly, is 21 to 23% of all generations use Skype. So it's something that basically everybody realizes is a universal use of the internet. Yeah? So that's what's universal. What's different? So from our point of view, I've sort of segmented the sort of landscape into these generations. And this is really, at the end of the day, this is broad brush. The idea of this is to try and illustrate the point. You need to think about your customers. And this is often not owned by contact center. This is owned by marketing. So unfortunately, as contact center people, we need to step into our marketing world, and we need to get all their segmentation models, and we need to understand everything that there is to understand about our customers. What are their ages? What are their ethnicity? What do they spend with us? What do they buy? What do they like? How do they communicate with us? That's our world going forward. So we've got to get into it. There's no point in just saying, we just deal with the demand. You know, whatever they create, we just deal with it. It's not acceptable anymore. We've got to step forward and deal with it. So these are our sort of generations. Millennials, I'll split those into two. If you're a 13-year-old, you do things fundamentally differently to a 22-year-old. You know, the big issue we've got is lots of people are starting to talk about microsegments developing, where literally the rate of change of technology is happening so fast that you might start to find 2 and 3 years is going to result in a change in communication habits. So it's that happening that fast. But let's talk about, unfortunately, sorry, we've lost the bottom of the picture there, but let's talk about these different generations and look at what they do. So young millennials, everybody's got a different definition of their ages, but this is the one I've given it. So teenagers, 12 to 18-year-olds. Yeah, I'm working on the assumption that up to the age of 12, you're not really got your own devices. I know that's probably not true anymore, but it certainly will be the case in my household anyway. So they will be using our devices until that point. So if you think about it, for young millennials these days, the smartphone is everything. You know, typically for a lot of teenagers, maybe certainly at 12, 13, the first device they're going to get is a smartphone. They're going to be using their parents' internet, all that sort of stuff. But in this modern generation, you're more likely to go and get a smartphone from on pay-as-you-go or whatever it is than anything else. So that's the first thing they get. SMS is fantastic, but if you interview youngsters about SMS, they're not passionate about it. They don't really talk about it, but they use it. They use it a lot. So SMS is really important. What's becoming more important is, who knows what BBM is? You're going to need to all know what BBM is. So BBM is BlackBerry Messenger. Now BBM is, I just want to state my view on this. BBM is the first effective free messaging platform that's sort of challenging SMS. Unfortunately, it's provided by BlackBerry, somebody who's not really keeping up with the pace. But what we are finding is there are a number of other platforms that are taking over. So I'll talk about that a bit later on. iMessage is the Apple equivalent. But this is basically the messaging platform that comes with the mobile device that uses the data link. It doesn't use the mobile network, so it doesn't cost you anything. And that's what's happening. There's a migration to use. They like it because it gives you more information, it's more functional. So you're going to see this really sort of taking off. The way they use social media is completely different. And this is probably one of the most interesting surveys I've read this year, is a survey that looked at 12 to 16-year-olds, 16 to 18-year-olds, and 18-year-olds to 22-year-olds, and the difference in the way they use social media, and it's quite phenomenal. So you would sort of assume that they all use social media in the same way, but they don't. We've gone through this Facebook generation, which I sort of call the broadcast generation, and then everybody's realised they don't like having all their information out there. And now, effectively, we're now into an area where teenagers are being much more controlled about the information they share, and they're controlling who they share it with. So there's a completely different usage of social media happening with the next generation that are coming through. They don't really do email, don't really understand email, not really in the workplace, don't need it. They have email accounts and things like that, but they tend to message. They don't use Twitter. So if you look at Twitter usage in teenagers, not interested. Okay? They don't blog, and they certainly don't talk. So internet very much is a collaboration tool. The interesting thing is, when you interview teenagers about use of the internet, they're on the internet, but they're not really on the internet, they're on social media. So they don't think about it that way. You ask them about internet usage, and they think Google, and they go, well, no, not really, don't really use that. But actually, what's happening is they're in social media. Some interesting data on smartphones, pretty frightening. So I actually got the last 6 months' figures last night off the internet, which is quite interesting. I'll give you those now. So I think we sold about 14 million handsets in the UK in the last 6 months. Yeah, so 13.6 million phones sold in the UK from July to December last year. 7.9 million were smartphones, data enabled. So the rate at which the people are changing those handsets out is much, much faster than everybody predicted. Yeah. So if you're young, you're very likely to get one of these. There's a lot of pressure on parents to buy BlackBerries or iPhones, yeah, because of the messaging services predominantly. And teenagers are basically using Facebook on the move. there was part of this research